Hello, everybody, and welcome to our seventh and final lecture on risk management in sport. So, once more, I'm not going to take up too much time. We are going to go as quickly as possible so that the video is not very long. So, we're going to start off by defining risk, which we have already done previously. I think it was in our lecture 3 that we defined and discussed a little bit of risk management. I remember saying that we will encounter risk a little bit later on where we will look at it in more details. So risk management is the process of identifying, um, assessing and controlling threats to an organization's capital and earnings. It could include financial uncertainties, legal liabilities, issues with technology, management errors, accidents, and natural disasters, which unfortunately cannot be foreseen or um, avoided. So there are three major types of risks, as we said before. Functional risks, these are risks that um, impact the accomplishing of the company's objectives. Asset risks, which are risks that harm the enterprise's assets, and security risks, which may be harmful to people in the enterprise as well as the enterprise's data. So there are 4 steps in the risk management process. The first step is identifying your hazards and threats. These can be internal and or external. The second step is looking at those hazards in the business activities. The third step would be measuring that risk and assessing the probability of it happening, and then deciding on what is the worst and prioritizing how to counter these risks that you have identified. And step number 4 would then be identifying alternatives. Okay, for example, you could avoid the risk by withdrawing from an activity. You can defer the risk that is waiting to see what happens. I think a lot of institutions and enterprises used deferment in the COVID-19 crisis. You could reduce this risk by implementing or improving control measures. Okay, for example, wearing a mask, sanitizing everybody that enters that facility. You could have a continuity plan where you continue to do as such, okay, with as well as transferring that risk to your insurance, for example. All right, so let's go with the first step, which is identifying risks. All right, so you need to first of all categorize your potential risks. It could be a business risk, okay, which is using a or identifying an incorrect business strategy for your enterprise, or the industry could simply decline. I think tourism industry was at risk of an industry decline over the past 2 years due to the pandemic. Okay, could be a financial risk. This is where you find that your company or your enterprise might not be making as much money or could be in a lot of debt. Okay, or somebody in the institution could be misusing your financial resources, which could put the company at a very big financial risk. It could be compliance risk. Okay, this one involves the law. It could be that you are not paying your taxes on time. It could be you are in breach of Companies Act, Employment Act, law of contract. We spoke about liability for facilities in the lecture 5. All right, or it could be succession problems, which is not really an issue in, I think, African and European institutions, but in Asia it is quite a big deal. And operation risks as well. For example, what's the health and safety for your employees? How is the morale? What's the reputation of your company? For example, most recently, Adidas' reputation was quite at risk because of their relationship with Ye, which they have quite rectified, I think, quite well in severing that relationship and reclaiming their reputation as an ethical institution. Right, so here are some key issues that you can use when you're assessing your risks. Okay, there's a lot of questions. You need to find out what is the nature of the hazard. Okay, is it personal? Is it an institution-wide? Is it internal? Is it external? What's the potential impact of that hazard that you've identified for your business or other stakeholders in your business, for your sponsors, for your customers? For example, most recently, Kakao, which is how do I explain this? It's an app, an online app, similar to WhatsApp, but the users of Kakao actually use it for everything. They use it to make payments, they use it to send messages, um, and such a lot of things rely on the very good function of that app. So when it crashed due to a fire at its headquarters a few weeks ago, an entire city almost came to a standstill. Seoul almost came to a standstill because people could not conduct their businesses. They couldn't accept payments. People couldn't make payments. People could not communicate with anybody because of that risk. Right. What are the key business and operational objectives? Could they be at risk? What are some of the linkages and dependencies within the sport organization? What are some of the consequences of the threats identified? I think, what are some of the legal issues? These are all the questions that you need to use when you're assessing your risk. So you identify your hazard, you identify the nature of that hazard, and then you ask each and every one of those questions to assess the level of that risk. All right, so once you've identified the level of the risk, you now need to prioritize what is the most important risk or what is the most dangerous risk that we face. For Manchester United at the moment, it could be Cristiano Ronaldo's attitude and the image that he's broadcasting online or in public. How is that going to impact or influence the institution's image? Are they liable for some of that brand image being taking a hit from his behavior and so on? Right, so once you've prioritized your risks and threats, then you can buy insurance. Okay, so make sure that as a company you've bought insurance. You need to limit your liability by making the right decisions. We spoke about cash flow. We spoke about cash flow a little bit earlier, and identifying potential future cash flow before you make an investment. Once that has been done, you can then implement a QA program. So you need to assure that you have the same level of quality for all your consumers across the board. And then identify your high risk customers. That would be perhaps in a sporting institution, it could be identifying your racist commenters, your loud, violent supporters, and making sure that you limit them by curbing their access to the field and causing harm to the image of the institution, or sorry, your enterprise. It could be very good to have a risk management team in such instances. All right, so what they have done in literature is they have identified a risk register, and this is just a generalized register. It's a document that you can use to track potential risks specifically within a project. Okay, because in sport we tend to treat each and every single um, job as a project. Why? Because it has a lifespan. You plan for an event, you develop an athlete, and so on. So in your register, you need to identify risks. You need to describe those risks, which we use where we like you ask those questions that we spoke about before to kind of identify those risks and describe them. estimate the likelihood of the impact of those risks, which we spoke about, I think, a long time ago, lecture 5. You create a risk response plan, prioritize those risks, and assign individuals within that risk management team to be responsible for each of those identified risks. Let's talk about insurance, which we hadn't spoken about in lecture 5. Right, so what is insurance? Insurance is where you take out an insurance plan. Okay, so you cover everything that you have within your enterprise so that you are safe. Okay, so using risk management can reduce the likelihood of claims made against insurance because you're taking measures to make sure that risks identified or hazards identified are taken care of before you're before an accident happens or an event happens, an incident happens where you need to claim insurance to cover some of the costs. So loss control requires the sport enterprise itself to voluntarily assess the risks. Okay, so you go through that whole process and take measures to avoid the risk. And the more efforts that you put into to control the risk, the less expensive your insurance premium. So that is a trick that companies actually use. That's why you find that there are disclaimers at the entrance of facilities or companies to say that whatever happens inside is not our fault and you enter at your own risk. So that if something happens when you're inside the institution, they can say, hey, you went in knowing that we are not going to take responsibility. So then they save up on their insurance and not pay you out. Right. What is loss control? There are two types of loss control: avoidance and prevention. So you can avoid a risk, okay, completely, and that is what we call avoidance. So you can see there is a risk coming up. What do? Cancel the event because you don't want to make that risk become a reality as it might have some legal or financial implications. Prevention, it's a series of measures that you take to reduce the chance of the risk occurring. Okay, so you can see there is a potential risk, but then you put up some measures to make sure that there is a lower chance of that risk happening. Let's talk about crowd control because we're in the business for sport and crowds are unfortunately a necessary evil. So lack of crowd control management can lead to the destruction of property, personal injury, and general hooliganism. So what can we do about it? You need to know your audience. For example, if there's a Highlanders versus Dynamos game, you know who your audience are. You know you need to have safety personnel on standby. You know you need to plan in advance for your lines. You need to be able to have an emergency plan. Okay, so use lots of signage, have people know which direction to go, where to sit, demarcate different areas. This is for young children, this is for VIPs and so on. Limit access to alcohol, all those good things that you can do to control your crowds at your sporting event. Facilities and equipment safety, we spoke at length about equipment safety, making sure that you have safety measures in place, your crowd control procedures are up to par, make sure your athletes are wearing the right safety equipment and gear, make sure that you have security in place, and make sure that you enforce all your safety rules. And that's it. So a very short lecture with this one, which is great. So we can save up on our data as well. I'm going to re-record lecture 5 because of the technical issues in class. And I'm also going to record lecture 2 and lecture 4 because um, some people may not have been able to attend those lectures. So let me know if you have questions. I will be available in the group. Have a good day. Bye-bye.